computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hello, and welcome back to our final episode of Season 1 of Sci-Fi Snacks, featuring women in science fiction. Thanks for coming along on this ride. And if you're new here, hey, cool Rebel You starting at episode 12. I like it. It's cool because you know what? Each episode keeps getting better. So you can just start here. But no, seriously, go back and check them all out. We had some amazing stories this season that I'm still thinking about and chatting about. And one of my favorite things about this podcast that I didn't really think about before I started was how different people are going to find this at different times. So I'm having conversations about stories in real life with people who just found the podcast or who listen here and there, so they're back at episode 4 or 6 or wherever. And so I'm not getting to talk about these stories just once, like a social media post where you read something and you're like, hey, this was awesome. And you chat about it for an hour, a day or two, if you're lucky, and then you move on. The podcast is creating these moments in my life where people are coming up to me and they're really like, oh my gosh, I would have picked this snack. I was told for the snack fail episode, their first thought was Twizzler pull-and peels because they're like spaghetti but candy. And I was like, that's brilliant. And I wish I could go back. I don't, because it created this conversation and this continuance. And I thought that was really beautiful. I've also learned another thing about myself is that I say the word beautiful a million times per episode. They definitely don't all make it to the final recording. I do a lot of cutting, but I've realized I might need to start looking at a thesaurus. And I blame the authors because they are writing really beautiful work. And sometimes when I'm just talking off the cuff or I'm looking at my bullet pointed notes, my brain just short circuits and I apparently default to the word beautiful for everything. And sometimes that's not really appropriate because we're talking about like these really heavy stories. And I'm like, oh, it's really beautiful how this tragic thing happened. And yeah, that's going to get edited out. But in general, I have been so impressed with all of the stories this season. And I'm just so excited about doing another season of this. This week's story is called A Slightly Different Sunrise from Mercury, Nevada, or Nevada. Don't come at me for how I pronounce things. From Strange Horizons magazine by Ede Hennessy. Ede Hennessy, they, lives in Northern California with her partner and a blind cat who can see ghosts. Her fiction has appeared in Fusion Fragment, Dark Matters, the Off-Season Anthology, Cosmic Horror Monthly, Flashpoint SF, and more. You can find links at Ede Hennessy, that's IDEHENNESSY.com, and on Blue Sky at edeofmarch.bsky.social. This was in the November 2024 issue, and it was up for several awards. So if you've seen it around, that's probably why. This story is about 4,000 words. I think it comes in at, 4,416 words. And just a heads up, there are some content warnings. So I'll give you those now so you can make a choice if this is the right time for you to be listening. The content warnings for the story, not today's podcast, for the story are disregard for personal autonomy, cancer, and drug use. What I really love is how much that I've learned this season, but what surprised me was the boost of confidence it gave me with my own writing. I'm writing more. I thought that this would be a project where I would have to kind of take a step back from my own writing just for sheer sake of time. And time is always an issue. You know, there's never enough time, especially if you're a caregiver like I am. Your days are packed. So you're always making choices about what gets priority. But this podcast, I've gotten this real rush of inspiration and confidence in my own writing because I'm reading stuff and I'm saying, I can do that. I know I can do that. I've got stories on my hard drive that need, a couple little tweaks. And then we're there. And then it's just about overcoming these rejections. Anybody who has submitted short fiction knows that the rejection rate is astronomical. We're talking, a pro rate magazine has a 2% acceptance rate. So that means you could submit 100 stories and 2 would be accepted. Now, the reality of that is a little different because everything is about finding the right fit and what market has the right vibe and what is this editor thinking on this day and themes that are coming up. And so it gets really complicated. It's not just write 100 stories and 2 will get accepted by a top tier magazine. It's not that at all. But what I have found is that as I'm reading more widely, I'm getting really clear ideas of what certain markets really like. And I'm able to look at my own work and be like, hey, I have stuff like this. Or that's not something I write at all, but I love to read it. So I'm not going to waste the editor's time submitting my stuff if it's not a good fit. And I'm not going to waste my time because I'm going to send it somewhere where I've got a better shot in terms of getting an acceptance. And so I was really surprised by the positive feelings doing this podcast has given me for my own writing. If you haven't ever heard of it, there's this thing called the taste gap. And all artists go through this, whether you have the words for it or not. And essentially what that is say you're a painter and you go to a museum and you're young, you've just started and you see a Monet or you see any sort of famous painting. And it doesn't even have to be famous. It's good. It's there. It's in the museum. And you're like, wow, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to paint like that. And so you go, you get all your supplies, you go home and you start putting paint on their canvas and you're like, holy crap, I suck. Why can't I do that? I know that that's what I want. And I know that that's what's good to me because, art's subjective, but that's what I deem to be good. And then I see what I'm putting on the canvas and I know it's not good. And that's so hard. That's so hard as an artistic person to be trying to do something and knowing it's not good enough. But the only way to get better is to suck a lot, again and again and again, and recognize that you have space and room for growth. And then you can close what's called the taste gap. You're not going to lower your taste level. You're not going to be like, you know what, I'm okay with stick figures when you really want to be painting beautiful impressionist paintings. No, you're going to practice and keep working and do 100 bad paintings so that you can create something that reaches your level of taste. And there are a lot of people who start writing who don't get there. And anything, they give up after that first painting or they give up after that first story that gets rejected. And they say, well, I guess I'm just no good. No, we're all no good when we start. And that's okay. And understanding that you have to go through that, it only gets better the more you work at it. So you've got to find that joy in the process. And this podcast for me is part of that joy in the process, is reading really, really good stuff and being like, oh gosh, why can't I do that? Well, I can't do that because I haven't written enough yet. So I just need to put my butt back in my chair and keep writing so that I can get there. So this week, I am celebrating our final episode with what I think has been my favorite snack of the entire season. When I was looking and doing the research, I started with the title and the fact that we have the state of Nevada. And I wondered, like, is there a state snack? What's the favorite snack of people in Nevada? Is there something special about Nevada that, would be an iconic snack pairing? Now, I didn't find like a state snack or something iconic, but what I did find was this really fun infographic of all of the favorite snacks of different states. They did some poll and, people were asked what their favorite snack was. And the most popular answer for Nevada was Cheetos. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. I love Cheetos. And I love all different types of Cheetos. And one of the things that they had in this article was how to pair Cheetos and wine. I like a good wine. I am not snobby by any means when it comes to wine. I have a box on the top of my pantry that lasts me all year because I just want a little bit of wine here and there, and I'm not picky at all. So when I saw that you could pair Cheetos and wine, I am on board. I went ahead with the Cheetos Puffs Originals and a rosé. And I decided that I like a sweet rosé. There are dry ones that I've had before, and it's just not my jam. And I decided for this case, we definitely needed a sweet rosé to pair with these cheesy Cheeto Puffs. And let me tell you, it was amazing. If you, next time you go to the grocery store or wherever, find yourself a cheap bottle of sweet rosé and grab a bag of Cheeto Puffs, and you're welcome. It's so good. Now, the one thing I did not do, which I have seen, is people use chopsticks to eat Cheetos to avoid that Cheetos dust on their fingers. I have not done this, mostly because I have one chopstick in my house. Like, I have a metal chopstick, and I don't have a complete pair anywhere. And I didn't feel like spearfishing my Cheetos. So I just, went in there like a kid and got my hands all covered in Cheetos dust and just licked it right off. All right. So a quick summary of this week's story is we are set in Nevada, so the southwest of the United States in the desert, in this area where there was nuclear testing going on for years. And we get a little bit of the history of that, and we meet our main character, Annie. And Annie is what's called a canary, and we don't know what that is right away. But we find out that this has now turned into like a tourist trap. And the effect of all of this nuclear bombing over the years is that it has opened up these time portals in all of these craters out in the Nevada desert. And they run these buses full of tourists to go time hopping. And the tour that we're on is going to a crater where they will see the first nuclear explosion here in the desert. So everyone is dressed up in these old 1950s type outfits. The tour guide is wearing that. They're all headed out there, and it's full of all of these kind of callbacks to the 50s when this nuclear bomb went out. And we find out that our main character, Annie, and her coworker Lars, they are there to deconstruct the bubble that gets put around them in the past. That's like this big mirror so that nobody in the past sees just all of a sudden all of these tourists popping up in the desert where they're going to blow up a nuclear bomb. So they're there to deconstruct that. But Annie has this extra bit of work that she does as a canary. And we find out that she willingly takes some kind of psychedelic mushrooms or something. She gets really high, and she's very sensitive to changes in time. And her whole job is to watch everybody and to see and to make sure that they are not disrupting the timeline. And it's this really interesting kind of point of view from this person who's getting progressively more untethered from reality a little bit. We're not quite sure at all times what she's thinking or what she's doing. And I thought that was really cool. And then they all go through, they see the bomb go off and the tourists all leave. And then we find out that Annie's friend Lars has cancer and he's dying. And that the company has said, oh, it's totally safe to be here. But like, he's been exposed to how many of these bombs. And you find out that his family has been exposed. His great-great-grandfather or whoever was there during the original one and lived downwind of this site, and he got a really rare cancer, and this rare cancer has killed everyone in his family line. And he is trying to leave this marble that he got from this ancestor at this site because he thinks that somehow it came from him, and that there's this time loop, and it creates this little paradox and things. So we have this conversation with him and Annie about it, and Annie is like, you can't leave it. You can't leave it. And she ends up giving it back. And he kind of is resigned about it, but he knows. He knows that they're not supposed to leave anything and that they can't disrupt the timeline and that they get in trouble. It's literally their job to make sure that doesn't happen. And then we find out that Annie is leaving things behind. And she's doing it so subtly. And this time she breaks out the lens of these goggles that the tourists were wearing so that they could look in the direction of this nuclear bomb. And she just pops out the lens and hides it in the dirt under a rock. And you're like, wait a second, what's going on? We end up leaving, and she chastised Lars for trying to do the exact same thing that she is doing. And you're like, what is up with that? So we don't know. Then we end up finding out. Annie comes back and gives her report and says, There were no problems. Everything was fine. I didn't detect anything at all in the timeline. It was all good. And she's totally lying because she's the one leaving stuff behind trying to change the future. And we're like, what are you trying to do? And then we come back and we see Lars has grown a mustache. But it's not a big deal to him because he's always had a mustache. And it's this tiny little change. And you're like, wait, how does leaving a lens behind in the 1950s bring us to the 2060s? And the only thing that's different is that Lars now has a ginger mustache. I don't know. She doesn't know. She is just like, we find that she has been leaving stuff behind trying to make these changes, and that the changes never make sense. So she is just going to keep doing this kind of time manipulation roulette. And then she goes back to her bunk that night and she sends a text to Charlie. Charlie is someone that we have met earlier through Annie's memories. Charlie was her lover, and she's hoping that Charlie and her relationship will have changed. And she finds out that Charlie's still mad at her and that they're not getting back together. And there's this really sad moment where you realize, and it all comes back together, that she's doing this to try and fix her mistakes of the past and get her love back, and it can't happen. It hasn't happened. And there's this heartbreaking line, why do you keep contacting me, Annie? And Annie responds, I was hoping you'd be wrong this time, that I'd be different. And you're like, all of this regret, all of this loss, all of this sadness about having made the wrong decisions, all of these decisions that she made in her past that have brought her to where she is. And the fact is that she can't change it. She can't go back. It doesn't matter what she does. She's here. She's stuck here. And also she can't stop trying. She is always going to try and see if she can somehow retroactively change her whole life with one of these tiny little butterfly effect things. And it was just like this gut punch at the end. And that leads me to what I really, really loved about this story was it felt like this really classic age sci-fi story. And I think a lot of that had to do with this 1950s nostalgia. The atmosphere of this story was so steeped in that kind of juxtaposition of this classic age of sci-fi and nostalgia and this near future desert vibe. And it felt so real. It felt really tangible. And I loved that. But it also felt really fresh and new. And I could almost, and maybe this is my own bias of course it's my own bias of what I've read of classic age sci-fi. In my head, if this had been written in the 1950s, we would have a male lead. We wouldn't have a queer relationship at its center with Annie and Charlie. It would be a man trying to change the past to get back with his lover and things like that. And I think that there's just this different layering to it, and it feels really different in this fresh modern lens that I really, really liked. So with this atmosphere, Ede really leaned into the desert feeling, but also this nostalgia, and then pointed out all of these anachronisms that were there. And I loved that kind of thought and that theme. I think we all look back at how things feel, but it gets kind of blurry when you get into the details of like, oh, what was it like to be a kid growing up in the 90s or a teen in the aughts? And I know my wires get crossed sometimes when trends come back around. It's that recycling of the kids nowadays are doing the things that we were doing growing up, but like we were recycling things from the 70s. We had the bell-bottom pants and the whole thing. And it's all just these cyclical recyclings. And I thought that was captured really well in this story with the almost costumes of the characters who were then going back in actual time to the 1950s. But it was this big like cosplay party for them. And I think of those college parties where you think of you pick an era and it's an 80s party and we're all like, well, we don't have actual 80s clothes, but 80s equals neon and denim and grunge, right? So like you just kind of go from there and it's your reinterpretation, cosplay of the past. And I thought that was captured in a smart way. Another thing that I was really touched by in this story was the complicated relationships, and not just with Annie and Charlie and their love story there that, you know, we don't know exactly what happened. We know Annie messed up somehow, that Annie runs away, that Annie can't stay anywhere. But the relationship between Annie and Lars was something that struck me personally in a way that I thought felt really true to a lot of platonic work relationships that I've had in my past, that I've seen in the past. And I thought that it was really refreshing to see that in fiction. So often when we have a relationship between a man and a woman on page, it's romantic. And there's nothing wrong with writing about romance. It's one of the core things about being human is how we relate romantically for a lot of people. And in this case, it wasn't that. You had this really kind of sweet banter that went back and forth that it almost felt like brother and sister. I don't know. I used to work with my brother at an amusement park when we were growing up, and my brother, my sister, everyone in our neighborhood, like everybody growing up worked at this amusement park. And this story gave me those vibes of you're the worker with all of the like tourist people on vacation. And there is that like subculture there. And Lars and Annie mocking the speech that was being given. And just then these little moments where they slipped into kind of deeper, more personal conversations. And then back into we're putting on a show for these people, or we're here to support this fantasy for these people. And I really loved that relationship. And then we find out that Lars has cancer and he's dying, and we get that relationship there. But where I feel like this could have gone, it could have pivoted to being like, oh, well, Annie is trying to save Lars from getting cancer by doing all these little things. But no, I appreciate that there's the complexity in this story where it's not about him. And I think that speaks to really good character development where you pick a character and a need for that character that is so deeply personal that they go above and beyond to do something that a normal person wouldn't do. And for Lars, his deeply personal reason is his family legacy of getting cancer from here and trying to connect with that and deal with that. And so he wants to leave this marble to see what that does and everything and tether him to his family and possibly change that. And that's not what Annie is doing. Annie is so wrapped up in her own hurt and her own world where, she hurt Charlie and that she's trying to fix that. And she is affected by the news from Lars, but it doesn't change that deeply personal drive that she has to fix her own life. And I thought that seeing that kind of selfishness on the page was so human. I think sometimes we spend a lot of time talking about problematic characters and plots and things like that. And there's definitely a place for that. But I think that literature is a place where it's really good to explore the darker sides of being human and being selfish. And if you wanted the perfect character, well, yeah, she's then going to try and save her friend because she can't save this relationship. She's tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed. She's not saving that, but she's going to keep trying because she's selfish. And we see it over and over again, all of these hints at her selfishness and the fact that she can't commit to anything or anyone. And I think that is such a well done characterization that I'm super impressed by it. Characters do things all the time that frustrate you as a reader, and I think we need to interrogate that on a deeper level. That's one of the reasons I think I sat with this story for so long after reading it was I wanted to interrogate, this isn't a character who did all the right things. How do I feel about that? What does that say about me? What does that say about my worldview? Good literature makes us ask these questions. And so I want to keep focusing on that in my own work. I think sometimes we get scared, especially if you're in a bubble online in the book space where people will bandwagon on, oh, this is a problematic character or they didn't do this right. And you can get yourself in a place where you're scared to write anything because you're worried that people are going to call out that you wrote a bad character. So that equals you are a bad person. And that is flawed logic. And it's not going away online because people like to be right. They like to feel righteous in their righteousness. So that's never going away. But I think what you can learn as a writer, if you're writing, is to treat characters as the well-rounded, flawed humans that they are and trust that readers are coming to your story to experience the fullness of humanity, and that a character who makes bad decisions does not mean you are a bad person or are endorsing it in any way. All the time we have stories about bad things happening, and it's because we're opening those conversations, not that an author is endorsing that point of view. They are showing it to you, revealing it, making you think about it. So that's dancing around a couple of things I've been seeing online lately that we will not be diving into specifics, but just think of that the next time you see something where people are maybe not critically exploring the themes, or ask yourself, why would they write a character like this? Now, there are stories where there are problematic bad people writing problematic bad books, but you can tell the difference. If you use your brain and you think about it and you interrogate it for a couple of minutes, you can tell the bad faith actors and the people who are exploring the human experience in all of its shades. So that's all I have to say about that. One of the last things that kind of fell into place for me with this story happened on the drive over to the library today. Was I realized that this is one of the longer stories that I've read this season. It's over 4,000 words, but in my brain, it didn't feel very long. And I think because it comes down to this story has a really clear hook. A hook is something that people have a hard time with a lot. Because what's the hook? You always need a pitch for your novel when you start querying. And it's a huge hurdle for a lot of people. because how do I distill 100,000 word epic into a paragraph or a sentence even? And I think that this story did that really, really well. And I wanted to think about that in a way that I could learn from it. This story to me distills down into a woman working at a time travel tourist trap, secretly leaves behind pieces of the future in the hopes of changing the past to change the future to reunite with her love. To me, that's the whole story. It's a 4,000 word story, but it boils down to that. And what I really love is that when you've got a clear hook, it's exciting and it encompasses all of that emotional baggage of the story in one like little distilled, like a warhead. That would have been a great snack for this show. The sour warhead candies, they're so distilled. They're so sour. They are just like a punch in your face, and it's all there in a tiny little package. That's what a hook is. I don't want to have to eat a whole bag of something that is, I don't know how far I can go with this metaphor. I don't want to eat some watered down version of your story to have to understand it. Give it to me in one punch. Let me feel all the feelings in one punch. Let me get excited. So before I've read the story, that gets me excited about the story because I can see the possibilities. And then after I've read the story, I feel like I can experience the whole gamut of the story in the hook. And I remember all of the feelings I had while reading the story. And that just, it was such a light bulb moment for me that I was like, I need to practice this with my stories. Maybe the stories that aren't selling because I don't have that clear hook. And you don't sell short stories on a query. So that's a little different. I know that the novel that I have out querying right now doesn't have a super strong marketable hook. It takes a bit to explain, and that's okay. There is leeway in science fiction, especially. But if the goal is marketability, if the goal is breaking into the business of traditional publishing and selling it, that's kind of important. You need to be able to do it. So with my next book, I started with the hook. And I said, we're going to start from this distilled thought that feels really like almost marketing copy. And we're going to create the novel from there. And it's just been a really interesting experience to work backwards. And it doesn't feel like it's cheapened anything. I think people are scared sometimes of marketing copy because, I don't want to sell my art. But I want to sell my art someday. So I can't ignore that. And I think that this story did such a good job. Even though it never has that, I was able to distill it. And it was just this kind of light bulb moment for me to see it on the page and to feel in my bones what a good hooky type story is. And now that I have been rambling for far too long, we are definitely cutting back this episode. We're going to wrap this back up and bring it all the way back to our snack. I'm going to need you to warm up before this reach. This is a stretch, but I am connecting my Cheetos snack to a pivotal moment in this story where Lars now has a ginger mustache once we have changed the past. And that is our big pivotal physical change in the future is this ginger mustache. Take your Cheeto, hold it up to your lip like a millennial. What is it? It's a ginger mustache. We've got orange Cheeto mustaches and a ginger mustache in this story. And we are celebrating with sparkly rosé. They had Moscow mules, but close enough. So that is my super succinct connection between the snack and the story. I hope you've had as good of a time as I have with this podcast series. Thank you so much for listening to season 1 of Sci-Fi Snacks. You better believe I will be back with season 2 in the fall. And if you're listening to this way in the future, hey, how cool. You can just listen to the next season where I will be discussing all of the punk genres that I can find. At first, I thought there's cyberpunk, there's solar punk, there's hope punk, there's a couple other steampunk. That's a really popular one. I was like, cool, I can do 12 episodes on 12 different types of punk. Maybe I'll find enough. It'll be great. I can duplicate some steampunk or cyberpunk. Let me tell you, the research rabbit hole we have gone down, every version of punk you can think of, I keep finding surprises. So hit me up over on social media. Check out my website. It is linked in all of my social media bios. You can find me on Threads and Blue Sky at Liz J. Bradley. And let me know, what are your favorite punk short stories? Right now, the list is not finalized, so convince me and I'll get your story on the podcast. Until then, keep on reading, keep on snacking, and have a great